watching CBC News BC. Benit Rach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what's happening this afternoon. Well, police are looking into a hit and run in Nanaimo that left one man dead. It happened yesterday evening at around 7 on Harmac Road, just east of Cedar Road Bridge. Police say the man was walking on the side of the road when he was hit by a driver who then drove away. The man died on scene. Investigators are now looking for any witnesses or any dash cam video from the area between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m. last night. And watch out for a windstorm tonight that's hitting the south coast. Environment Canada says the system will bring brief but gusty winds up to 90 kilometers an hour. The strongest winds, they're expected around midnight and will end early tomorrow morning. The storm could cause power outages in some areas. Wind warnings also in place for East Vancouver Island, Metro Vancouver and Haida Gwaii. Environment Canada says we are also expecting some more rain this weekend, but it's nothing compared to that atmospheric river that we saw last week. North Shore Mountains could get another 75 millimeters of rain. And a major search is underway for a man who is missing in Coquitlam. So 59-year-old Robert Belding has been missing since last Sunday. About 40 personnel have been on the scene this morning. This is Robert here. Crews believe that he was swept away by the surging river after that rain while trying to save a dog.
This is our last push to be inside the river because, just as you mentioned, there is another big weather system coming up tonight. Yesterday, we coordinated with BC Hydro to reduce their discharge at the Coquitlam Lake Dam in order to create a window of lower water flow to assist our search. It's hoped that between the reduced discharge from the dam and the lack of precipitation, loading the other feeder creeks, that we'll have the best chance to find Robert today if he is in the river.
The search will go on until the end of the day. If Belding isn't found, emergency crews says they will re-strategize for that search to continue. And the only high school in the new Westminster School District is moving to a staggered schedule next fall. This comes after Surrey attempts to address overcrowding as well. New Westminster Secondary School has a capacity of 1,900 students. Right now, there are around 2,200 students that are attending. And the chair of the New West District Parent Advisory Council says some have described this as a fishbowl.
Hallways are crowded, lining up for lunch at the cafeteria. You may stand there the whole hour for your lunch period and not get through and to be able to purchase your lunch. There are only 800 lockers in the school. Most students don't have a locker. Getting into the classes you want, if you are looking at post-secondary and have a plan for the courses that you need to enter into the program of your choice, you may or may not get those classes. You're having to take summer school to get those classes in because there's just not enough space in the classes for the students.
Meanwhile, Burnaby School District also announced this week that 5 high schools might do the same in 2025. And Vancouver Marathon co-founder and Order of Canada recipient Jack Taunton has died. He is described by his alma mater and former employer UBC as a giant in sports medicine. He was a nationally ranked marathon runner. Eventually, he organized the race that became the BMO Vancouver Marathon. He motivated to help athletes heal from injuries. He also went into sports medicine. He was 77 years old. And you are updated with the latest news. I'm Benit Rach. You're watching CBC News BC. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Police in 3 Metro Vancouver municipalities have sounded the alarm over what they're calling a recent surge in violent incidents involving young people. So what is driving this behavior, and how do we keep our youth safe? And gardening guru Brian Minter will be here to answer all of your questions and talk about pumpkins. I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. Happy Friday, and thank you for joining us on radio, TV, and live stream. We're also live on TikTok, and we'll be taking your comments throughout the show. You can find us at CBC Vancouver, and you can call us now on our top story. How do we prevent violence amongst youth? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call us at 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. Email us bctoday@cbc.ca. But first, it seems to be the never-ending election. October 19th ended with neither Premier David Eby's NDP nor the BC Conservatives, led by John Rustad, securing the 47 ridings needed for a majority. So, nearly a week later, are we any closer to finding out who will lead BC? For more on this, we are joined by CBC reporter Mira Baines. Hi, Mira. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So, what can we expect from this weekend? It's going to be a big one.
It is going to be a big one, and already it's just been so messy. So
that is an astute way to describe it.
yeah, so from what we understand from Elections B.C. is that there were about 49,000 mail-in ballots. That number has been updated to 65,000 mail-in ballots that have yet to be counted.
Okay.
So
that's a big difference.
Still a bunch of ballots in the bag that need to be counted. And then you have recounts in 2 very close ridings where they have a vote difference of less than 100.
Right.
And then a partial recount in Kelowna Centre where there was kind of a situation involving a human and a tabulator and a 1 vote difference. So then they're going to have to do a partial recount there as well.
Okay, so those are things to keep an eye on. I guess, what are those key ridings that could really be the deciding factor in the election results, or are there key ridings that could decide that?
Well, a lot of analysts are saying that they really don't expect the numbers to really move.
Okay.
But with so many ballots still to be counted, the margin's just so close, I really think anything can happen. But Surrey City Centre is going to be recounted, and so the NDP are leading in that riding, and the vote difference there is 95 votes.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And then the other one is Wandafuka Malahat. And that's the big one. So Surrey City Centre, we're going to know the results on Sunday. But Wandafuka Malahat is basically, there's a 20 vote difference. And the NDP are leading right there.
Okay. Yeah. And we just got a comment on TikTok from Caitlin. And she says, is it not suspect to have an election take this long to call? Maybe not suspect, but is it unusual?
Well, look, we had 2017. Right? Like,
yes. We seem to be setting a trend here in BC.
Yeah, but it just shows how undecided people were, or how they were supporting this side and that side, and how divided that electorate is, right? Okay. And stuff. So it is interesting, but it's not the first time.
No, and I guess we've heard the rumblings and the analysis, but could a BC Green Party and NDP coalition sort of end the BC Conservatives' hopes for a win?
Well, I think when we use words like coalition, it really means something. So what kind of agreement the NDP and the Greens could come up with is still a mystery, but it could be a confidence and supply agreement, or it could be on a vote-by-vote basis, but that could really produce a very shaky government going forward. So there are a lot of possibilities, but hey, what if those seats flip? Those 2 really close ridings, they flip to the Conservatives, then they can form a majority. So, it's really too hard to call at this point.
Right. And so not much rest for you this weekend once again, I'm assuming?
No, I'll be here on Saturday, and Dan Burrett will be here on Sunday, so we'll be keeping an eye on everything.
We are lucky to have you both with us, and thank you for having a little time just to keep us updated on what a week it's been. All right.
For sure.
We'll probably talk to you on Monday.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to Calgary on Monday, so I'm
Good plan.
washing
Good
my hands
plan.
of this.
All right. Well, take care. Thank you. CBC reporter Mira Baines. And it is 12:11, and this is BC Today. Now, yesterday on our show, we discussed the newly announced immigration plans that would reduce the number of immigrants in 2025 and 2026 and 27. Here are some of your thoughts. Norm writes, firstly, let me say I am not anti-immigration. My wife and stepdaughter are immigrants. My family were immigrants in the mid-late 1800s. The difference between then and now was the needs of the economy were driving immigration. Farmers, tradesmen, miners, laborers, soldiers, policemen, chemists, teachers, and every other type were required. Frequently, they were told, enticed, limited to where they could settle. The now, I would say, started in the early 70s and 80s. The economy was slowing down, so government of the day decided to use immigration to drive the economy, create demand for housing and food and consumer stuff, and the political bonus of votes from the immigrants. It's no secret immigrants tend to vote for the political party that let them in. Fair enough. As a result, some political parties use this to their advantage, opening immigration to swell votes. Charlene writes, okay, restrict immigration, brace for labor shortage. Employers will have to raise wages to attract workers. Prices don't go up. Don't complain about rising prices. It's all logical and expected. Better not to fall for slogans about a hatchet tax, and make it easier for professionals to get qualified. And we also asked for your favorite horror film recommendations, and we still want them. We have 2 passes to this weekend's Vancouver Horror Show Film Festival to give away. So call us at 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950, or email us bctoday@cbc.ca. We have seen a surge of violent incidents across the city recently that have been instigated by youth. On Monday, a teenager was stabbed at Terry Fox Park in Port Coquitlam, left with non-life-threatening injuries. 3 youth are suspects at large and were seen fleeing the incident in a black sedan. Over the weekend, a Richmond teen was arrested after having made online threats to shoot up a nearby school. And in North Vancouver, police have seen an increase in kids carrying weapons, from knives to homemade tasers to airsoft guns. So how do we reduce youth violence? And how has youth violence impacted your family? Call us now. Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also dial 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. And email us, as always, bctoday@cbc.ca. Today I'm joined by Cal Dosange. He's the founder and CEO for Kids Play Foundation, a nonprofit that works towards keeping kids away from the lifestyle of drugs, gangs, and violence. Thank you for joining me, Cal. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what do you make of this upsurge in violent attacks by youth recently in Metro Vancouver?
I think this is what we need to understand. It's not necessarily an upsurge. From my experience as a law enforcement officer and my current capacity as CEO and founder of Kids Play Foundation, we've seen peaks and valleys with respect to the kind of behavior. I think what the general public needs to understand is that when they see these kind of high profile events happen, it comes within their purview, and all of a sudden there is this instant panic response, as in that these kids are completely out of control. I think what we need to understand is that these things have always happened. Some have been high profile, some others not so much. But this type of behavior amongst kids is more and more common, especially now where kids have quick access to information via electronic devices. Practically every kid is carrying these high-powered electronic devices in their pockets. And if you notice some of the swarming incidents that have happened, practically every kid had their phone out.
Right.
And they were using it and instantaneously sharing it on their social media platforms. So there's some multiple factors that are responsible for this kind of behavior.
And when you say, when we have these incidents now, we see all these children with their phones out. It's not to say that these incidents are performative, that they're doing this to get on social media, is it?
Partly, yes. And there's a lot of attention-seeking behavior there, and
Okay.
for this is something where there's no bestowed sense of responsibility for what's happening. For example, the bystander effect, where these kids take out their phones and they record this information instantaneously, share it on their Snapchats. Well, they're completely devoid of any kind of responsibility because they think they're just standing there and just watching it, and they're not participating in any effective way. And with respect to the bystander effect, it's like, it's not my responsibility. I'm not responsible for this, not my problem. Maybe the next person will call police or get help. And the other disturbing aspect of all this is the wolf pack mentality, the mob mentality, where it distributes responsibility amongst a larger pack or mob of kids. And so, with respect to the swarming, many of them were involved in the swarming. And these incidents that you're alluding to that just happened recently, it was multiple kids.
And this
that
is
were
the one in
involved.
Kelowna that we're referencing.
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's other happen in Lower Mainland as well. Very similar MOs where it's a bunch of kids that are responsible for the attack and a bunch of kids that are standing by and watching with their cell phones out and distributing the videos because they think it's hilarious, or that shock factor that they're looking for. And so a lot of it's attention-seeking behavior. But what we need to appreciate and understand is that what is this behavior that they're exhibiting, what's symptomatic of it? And so what is responsible? What's the root cause? And the majority of these kids that are responsible for this kind of deviant behavior, a lot of them are experiencing their own mental health or trauma or dysfunction. So we need to be considerate of these things.
Cal, I'd like to bring in a couple of our audience members now. We've got quite a few calls coming in. We'll go to Pete in Vancouver first. Hi, Pete.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. What did you have to share about the uptake we're seeing in youth violence?
I think ideally you want to do dual strategy, get them young. There's a program called Roots of Empathy. If your listener just Google rootsofempathy.org. It's already being used in BC schools. It's for 5 to 13. They also have a Seeds of Empathy for 3 to 5-year-olds. I think teaching empathy is so critical, and if it's not in all the school systems, I would encourage it to be, but also, especially when you get into teenage years and the benefits and the degeneracies of social media, it sort of encourages narcissism, selfishness, and othering other people. I would like to see some program that's taught at the high school level for empathy and teaching social skills. Also, it would be very crucial for the government, whether it's going to be the NDP or the Conservatives, to stop pretending they care about mental health and actually screen kids for mental health, because sometimes you have higher rates of people with mental health getting in situations where they may not be able to control their emotions well, and things happen. So like diagnose and screen for ADHD, depression, anxiety, bipolar, with the caveat is like you can have no mental health conditions and still be violent.
Right.
But if you look at the actual research, 21 to 45% of prisoners in jail have ADHD and higher rates of adults and kids, and the BC government refuses to properly train doctors to diagnose and treat ADHD. The BC NDP promised that they would screen, add ADD to special ed so they'd get accommodations and IEPs. Back in 2017, Rob Fleming, they've never done that. I hope with the BC Greens, they have a policy that you will get 6 hours of psychologists covered under MSP that will actually help diagnose ADHD, bipolar, other mental health conditions. I hope the Greens do that, and I hope because that will make a really big difference.
It would. Pete, thank you so much for both of those points. And Cal, as he said, it's sort of it is twofold. It's starting very young, at a very young age, teaching them that empathy and that connection with others. He spoke about roots of empathy, and I'm familiar with that with my children's schooling, where they were, whether it's babies being brought into the classrooms, just teaching them to see people in a different way, but also the mental health aspect, which you alluded to. Many of these kids are being impacted and perhaps are falling through the cracks. So how do we start young to make sure that we support them as they age and don't fall through the cracks?
Yeah, if you just listen to what the recent caller was just speaking about, essentially, if you boil down his conversation, that's a consensus of what the general public believes, that we can say to the school districts, hey, you should be running these programs. We can say to law enforcement agencies, hey, you guys should be running these programs. Or we can say to our politicians, you guys should be legislating or ratifying these new policies or motions. What we need to understand is that everybody is compartmentalized into the respective silos and operating independently of one another. It's not until we all start to work together in unison and collaborating and working in conjunction to resolve this issue, nothing's going to get resolved. The parents as a whole are quick to point fingers at different institutions and agencies and saying, well, you should be running educational programs, you should be doing this to help our kid. At the end of the day, it all starts at home.
And I thank you for making that point, because it is true. We quite often look outwardly for a fix. So what role does parenting play in this? How can parents start, and what are sort of those fundamentals that they need to implement right from infanthood, I suppose?
Most importantly, communication. And we hear it all the time. It is so important to establish that bridge of communication with your kids. Anytime Kids Play Foundation has any kind of forum or conference or presentation within the community, we make it a critical point of inviting out the parents, because if we just invite out the kids and tell them, well, don't do drugs, and here's the reason why you shouldn't be doing drugs, granted, we'll get the point across to them. They might change their behavior, but if they continue to go back into that same environment which caused that behavior in the first place, and there's no fundamental or rudimentary significant change, they're going to revert back to that kind of behavior. So unless you have massive paradigm shift at home, where the parents engage their kids with constructive conversation, where the parents are engaged with their kids, case in point, with Kids Play, we're just one organization. There's many other organizations doing a tremendous amount of work. But if we're providing free programs to these kids that'll give them educational awareness and keep them engaged in positive, constructive activity, then the parents have a responsibility and a burden of obligation to take out that time, bring their kids to these programs, and keep their kids engaged and anchored, versus, once again, turning to institutions and agencies saying, it's your problem, you help my kid, here you go.
I do have an email to read from Victor in Brackendale. He called in and said, games that the kids are playing now are so violent and graphic, it leads to a lot of violence these days. He says they are spending over 8 hours a day on gaming, and we would love to have more calls and emails on this topic about youth violence and whether it's impacted your family or what's behind it. You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. We've had Cal Desange with us this afternoon from Kids Play Foundation, talking about the important role of support and communication for when kids are very young, all the way through their childhood and teenhood. Cal, you do have this this role that you played in law enforcement. I am curious, for these kids that do participate in these violent acts, that perhaps do get caught, what are the ramifications for them that, perhaps they don't understand will follow them through, perhaps even into adulthood, that just because they're youth doesn't mean they get off scot-free?
Absolutely, and these kids need to understand the serious consequences of their actions. If I allude to my previous experience as a beat patrol officer in the downtown east side, I used to see a steady stream of kids that were coming into the open air drug market, and these kids were engaging in the drug market by either selling or using, or both. And the majority of these kids, the greater statistical percentage, came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they had never been afforded extracurricular educational or sporting opportunities. So there was never any other alternative that had been presented to them. And the general public was quick to point a finger at these kids and say, you do the crime, you do the time, it's your responsibility. versus actually taking out the time to guide, lead, mentor these kids and give them the amenities and the resources and the support systems they need to be successful. Now, we have this expectation of these kids that you are required to be law-abiding citizens. But if these kids come from toxic, dysfunctional family environments and have never been taught otherwise, we can't necessarily hold them at the same expectation level that we do everybody else. I think we have an onus and burden of responsibility to give these kids the support systems that they need to be successful in life. But in order to change that trajectory, we need to be there for them and help them and give them what they need to be successful in life.
We had
And
to.
there was multiple.
Sorry, I
There
didn't
was
mean to
multiple.
interrupt.
No, no, not at all. And so it was on account of various incidents in the downtown east side. If it's okay with you, I'd like to share one of them. But I remember with this young boy that was sitting in a lane in the 100 block East Hastings, and he was getting his crack pipe ready at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I later learned he was 14 years old. And I recall asking him, it's like, what are you doing down here? Why are you using these drugs for your family? And I'll never forget his response. And instead of answering my questions, he posed the following questions to me. He said, tell me something. He said, if your mom left you when you were young and you have no idea who she is or where she is, your dad's lying drunk on the sofa right now and has no idea where you are, and your only brother's sitting in jail for dealing drugs and there's nobody else at home. He said, where would you be?
Wow.
And he was absolutely right. It's when we take something like that, a story like that, and we put it into context, only then we can begin to understand what kind of environment some of these kids come from. So once again, yes, we do have responsibility. Let's give these kids the positive, constructive outlets that they need in order to start changing their trajectory.
That's just heartbreaking, and what an impact, obviously, that had on you. We do have one more call. We've got time for one more call, I should say, to Chris in Cranbrook. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Not too bad, and thank you for taking my call.
Of course.
But your first caller, I really had to agree with a lot of the statements that he made. Okay?
Okay.
Like, kudos to him. But how do you prevent this? I'm living in Cranbrook, and I listen to the Kelowna, the CBC, and that 13-year-old child, at the end of September, was swarmed.
Yeah.
And badly beaten up. But, apparently these kids have done it before. So you can't publicize the names.
No, of course,
juveniles.
they are still children.
But you can. The parents are not juveniles. Embarrassment is a powerful weapon.
I do hear what you're saying.
To be accountable.
Okay, Chris, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And Cal, we are almost out of time. That is a familiar refrain that we do hear, that it's the parents that should be held accountable and embarrass these people for what has happened. Does that work?
Look, if we start doing something like that, that's not resolving the situation. Now, essentially what we're doing is it's tit for tat. It's we're going to hold you responsible. Yeah, granted, at the end of the day, we can possibly attribute this child's behavior to a lot of the dysfunction these children might be experiencing at home. But I think the greater resolution here is going to be educational awareness. It's going to be giving these kids the type of attention. Like, for example, yesterday, I did a presentation to some high-risk kids out in Richmond. And a lot of these kids came from various different backgrounds across the spectrum, different ethnicities, different religious, different faiths, different family backgrounds. But the common denominator was that a lot of them came from that toxic, dysfunctional backgrounds in their family environments, which led them down that path in the first place. And so we need to start that healing process where we can connect with these kids, let them know, hey, we care. We legitimately want to help you out. And it's when you approach these children with that sense of sincerity, authenticity, genuineness, and say, look, we stand with you. You have help. You don't need to go down this path. that's where the real healing starts to begin with these kids. And I can tell you for a fact, it's not a complicated formula, and it doesn't take an academic leap to understand that these are very simple concepts. You give children a positive path, they will change their behaviors.
They'll
Just
take
that
it.
simple. Of course they will,
Cal,
because they're always looking for.
I apologize. We are straight out of time, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time with us today and for just showcasing that a lot of work needs to be done, but it is certainly very doable.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care, Cal. That was Cal Desange, founder and CEO for Kids Play Foundation, and we reached him in Vancouver. Coming up right after the news, we will have Brian Minter to answer all your questions, but right now, it is time for the CBC News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Charges of mischief and uttering threats have been laid against a Kamloops RCMP officer. Constable Adrian Griffin makes his first court appearance November 21st. The prosecution service did not release details about the incident, but says it happened this past March. Deep Cove homeowners pushed out of their homes due to flooding from this past weekend's atmospheric river are now allowed to return. The District of North Vancouver says crews have completed work to remediate hazards. A statement from the district adds that those hazards may still be present at the properties, and homeowners are encouraged to undertake their own due diligence. And we should know the final results of the provincial election on Monday. Elections B.C. says starting Sunday, there will be recounts for 2 ridings and about 65,000 absentee ballots will be counted. Several ridings remain too close to call. And now the forecast. Wind warnings are in effect for several areas, including Greater Victoria, the Southern Gulf Islands, and sections of Metro Vancouver. Gusts could reach 90 kilometers an hour, up to 110 on Haida Gwaii. On the north coast, cloudy this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 10, highs to 4 and sunny in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, increasing cloudiness this afternoon with a high of 3, highs to 7 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly cloudy with a high of 9. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mainly cloudy this afternoon with highs up to 12 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Have you ever wanted to know all there is to know about pumpkins?
No.
Yes, you
no,
have.
I haven't.
Yeah, you
no,
have. So
not
stick
really
around.
a pumpkin. I'm not a pumpkin fan. I have a friend who makes a lot of things out of pumpkins.
Guess what, my friend?
Not
After you
not
hear
a real
Brian,
fan.
you're going to be a pumpkin fan.
Kind of like baby food a bit. Do you know
Stick
what I mean?
around. There's so much to learn. Thank you, Rob.
Hey, you're welcome, Amy.
Have a good weekend. And
Good.
for more what's happening around Metro Vancouver, here's Gloria Makarenko for what's coming up today on the coast.
Amy, hi there. It's Gloria Makarenko. And we invite you to join Belle Puri for On the Coast this afternoon. She will be hosting today. And Belle's going to hear from someone who started to rethink just how we navigate our road system, how we act on the roads after a near life-changing accident. And they'll also discuss a bill that aims to create a criminal offense when someone exercises coercive control over their partner. So tune in to On the Coast this afternoon between 3 and 6.
And happy Minter Friday to all who celebrate. Yes, BC Today's gardening columnist, Brian Minter, is here to take your questions about all things gardening. And again, call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or hit pound 690. Or send us your comments on CBC Vancouver's TikTok channel. You can also email today at cbc.ca. And Brian, I understand that pumpkins, they're not just for Halloween. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Oh my goodness gracious! Yeah, last time we're going to take that little pumpkin for granted. Let me tell you. Okay.
Okay.
The word pumpkin comes from pepon. It's a Greek word which means large melon. 90% of pumpkins are water. 90%. And it's not a vegetable. It is actually a fruit, technically. So that's something to keep in mind. They grow in every continent except, of course, Antarctica. Not a lot of pumpkins growing in Antarctica. But the other thing about the pumpkins, we just think about the fruit, when in fact the flowers are edible, like squash, the leaves are edible, and the roots are edible. Virtually every part of the plant is an edible. And not just grown in the United States, only 1 billion pounds, that's 500,000 tons in America alone. And of course, they're grown all over the world. Wow. And which is kind of interesting. They've been around, probably the thought was coming out of South America about 7,500 years ago. So they're kind of an older little fruit here. Okay. And the health benefits of pumpkins are just way over the top, no question. From, the seeds, of course, we talk about being really good, but they have lots of fiber. It is one of the fruits that has more fiber than virtually anything else, and a lot of beta carotene in there, micronutrients, and it's low in calories, so all those good things. So you can go ahead and eat all those pumpkin pies with no problem now. Okay, just don't add the sugar.
Oh yeah, the whipped cream.
But and they size up as well. According to the Guinness World Records, the largest pumpkin was grown in Germany. It was 2,624 pounds. So, wow. Quite some pumpkin. Yes, and there's one in California. I think it was 2,500 pounds this year. And health benefits, they help our immune system because of the vitamin A and vitamin C. Our eye health, the macro degeneration, they're a really good, I guess, fruit to eat and to help macular degeneration or prevent it. In terms of our skin, they're a wonderful antioxidant. In terms of our health, they lower our cholesterol, which is kind of good. And overall, they're so full of vitamins and minerals and micronutrients, and they just have it all. They're absolutely great. And, when we, as garden writers, we were in Florida many years ago, being invited to look at the space exhibit in terms of, where long-term space travel. This is even before we started thinking about it, 25 years ago. They were using pumpkins as in cylinders with no soil, just with a misting chamber. That was the food of choice for long-term space travel, because you can eat everything, easy to grow. They produce, so much in terms of a return. They have it out there. And, each pumpkin contains about 500 seeds. You're talking about an average pumpkin of about 10 pounds, give or take a little bit out there. And of course, where would we be at this time of year without the pumpkin spice latte?
Right.
I mean, and the pumpkin baking we do. So, and I don't believe this. They said there's over 45 different varieties. I think one kettle alone has about 60 varieties of different types of ones. And of course, they are a squash, technically. They're in the squash family. But so in terms of food, but they're used in decor all over the world, but all the health benefits. I mean, we should stop everything else and just start eating pumpkins. They're just absolutely amazing.
Brian, you've blown my mind yet again. I kind of feel like I have to go home and just tip of my hat, give some respect to my Halloween pumpkins that I'm about to just carve into next week. All right, Brian, we have got lots of calls lined up already, so let's get to them. Joan in Terrace. Hi, Joan. What's your question for Brian?
Brian, thank you for all the gardening information and help that you give people, first of all.
Now, you're very kind, Joan.
About 23 years ago, now I'm not quite sure on the years here, but about 23 years ago, I planted a Coosa dogwood. And over time, I was convinced it was some other kind of dogwood because the leaves didn't go red in the fall, and there was other things. And so okay, I've got a other kind of dogwood. Well, imagine my surprise this year to see berries, and they were mostly on the east side of the tree. And it's been a long time I've had it. So is this usual?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I just chuckle when I hear that, Joan, because I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, I got a phone call, a desperate phone call from a manager of a seniors home. And because all the seniors, they had lots of Kuza dogwoods around the place, were eating all these wonderful seeds, and they're quite edible, by the way. So, yeah, they do produce seeds. They usually don't take 23 years, Joan. That's amazing. But I'm glad you got a Kuza. They grow all along the coast of China, Japan, and Korea. That's where they're native to, and we love them here because all the early ones bloom in May, all the Natale types and so on, but it starts blooming in June. It's a month later, and Satomi is my favorite. It's a beautiful, beautiful pink. So that's good to know. I'm finally got to the point where we know it's a Kuza dogwood, Joan, after all these years. Okay.
Thank you.
Will I expect it to bloom next year?
There you go. It just
Absolutely,
needed
yes.
to take a little time. I'm glad it's lived up to its potential now. Thank you, Joan. Jean in Port Alberni, I understand you have a little bit of a problem.
Yes. Hi, Brian. I seem to have some kind of an infestation. Started with my beautiful chard, had holes in the leaves. Then next thing I knew, the plant was virtually gone. Same thing happened with the kale, the Brussels sprouts, the tops of the turnips. I started digging around underneath, and I found some kind of worm or grub that curls up in a circle, all different colors. Some were bright green, some are black, some are beige, some are brown, different sizes. And yesterday I was in my flower garden at a complete other end of the property, and here they were in there. They seem to be all through my vegetable garden. So I don't have those crops for this year, but I'm worried about next year, and I'm hoping there's something we can do with these critters.
Yeah, I'm a little optimistic, Gene. A couple of things. Number one, I think you have two different issues. On our Swiss chard and beets in particular, they get attacked by a leaf miner first thing in the spring. And it just, there are just more pests out there right now. And Gene, for that simple really thing, I take remake cloth, the floating row cover, and I just throw it over top during the daytime, and just to keep them out of there for that period. And they seem to have that specific time that they're into the the leaves and spinach and everything else, but they can be easily controlled by the remake cloth. And I've done that myself. We had a problem this year as well, Gene. The other thing in terms of the chewing, it's the cabbage butterfly moth that I think is our biggest concern. And there was a concern I noticed in the paper this year. It said, "Oh my gosh, the cabbage butterfly moth is you must be suffering because we don't see as many of them." Well, they were just late because they're all over the place. Trust me. And but we normally have been using. Yeah, we've been using BTK as a control. It's a bacteria, doesn't affect us or animals and so on, but it is or they're predators. But BTK seems to work very, very well. Once a week, once every 10. All your brassicas, for example, clean and fine. Now, you bring up one other issue, and it's a very good issue, Gene, and that is in amongst the roots, we are getting the larvae right now of so many different insects in the soil, in our lawns in particular. And we are finding, we talked about this last year, for the lawns, instead of using nematodes, because the effectiveness of nematodes for any type of grubs is just really not very good at all. BTK. The same thing. Instead of using it as a spray on your foliage, use it as a soil drench. It stays in the soil. A lot of the grubs are in a life cycle right now where the eggs are being laid for next year, but the grubs, the BTK seems to be able to take care or control of those grubs. So what I would do now in my soil, I would put a drench of BTK, and perhaps do it again in the spring when you see any type of larvae that are beginning. Do BTK right away. That seems to be organic and effective without harming natural predators. So I think that's the way to go, Gene.
So we could put an application on now on the vegetables that are left in the garden?
Yeah, it is. If you certainly the butterflies are gone now, so there's no point spraying the plants. That season's over. But if you're having trouble with grubs in the soil, the BTK application, the soil application now in those areas, I think would be very beneficial. I really do.
All right, Jean, hopefully that helps. Good luck with everything. And we invite your calls. Get them in now while Brian's here at 604-669-3733. You can also email or also call 1-800-825-5950, pound 690 on your cell. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we're also live on TikTok and taking your comments. You can find us at CBC Vancouver. We did have an email from Marianne. Brian, she writes, I had a beautiful wavy jade cypress plant in a pot. It's been fine for several years, but I think it didn't get enough water this summer. The tips of the plant are still green, but inside branches have turned brown and the needles have fallen. The question is, should I leave it or cut it back or throw it out and start over? Thank you for all your years of advice. Well, that's nice. What can she do to save this plant?
That's wonderful. Well, first of all, throwing it out is the very last option. After we tried, the first top 10, then we'll look at that. Okay,
we're not
we
there
can always
yet,
say
Marianne.
things. Yeah, exactly. And she does bring up a very, very good point. A lot of us look at a succulent and say, look, the succulent is a drought-loving plant, so I'm not going to water once every 2 weeks. That's not true, because already when you look at succulents or cacti, the fact is we put them in incredibly well-drained soil, so the soil doesn't hold water. And then we only water infrequently. They need more water than that. So I would look at all my succulents and cacti once a week, warm water, give them a thorough drink, and just watch them and see if they need more. But don't let them get too dry. And this is exactly what happens, as Marianne's pointing out. So at this point here, going into the poor growing conditions of all plants indoors as we get shorter days and the heat comes on, put the jade plant near a window. And I would just basically leave it now. And the reason I'd leave it now, because I love to prune things back hard. We're not in a growing cycle where things are going to start branching out. So let's wait, leave it there, clean it up as best we can, give it more water, and it'll start looking a little bit better. No feeding this time of year until April of next year again. But once we get into mid-April, I am ruthless. I love pruning those jade plants back really maybe about a third, even halfway, because they break new growth out of old woody type of material stems. So that's what I would do next year. And the good thing is when you cut all those branches off, just stick them in some well-drained soil in a pot and you'll get all kinds of new plants. So now we're going to leave it. We're going to water a little bit more. We're going to put it near a window. And in April, we're going to cut it back hard. And that plant will survive beautifully and flush out next year and probably start feeding it then something like 2020 will completely turn that jade plant around.
Wonderful. Hope that helps, Marianne. And Brian, I try to channel you recently when I do my pruning. I'm always so delicate, and now I just go in, ruthless, just
absolutely.
Like you said.
None of this delicate stuff. No,
I love it. It's freeing. Jasper in Richmond, you've got a call or a question for Brian. Thanks for calling us.
Yes. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Jasper.
Hi. I have two practically 20-year-old Actinidia arguta isai vines in the garden. One, each is different from the other. One has a more pear-shaped fruit and the other is a squarish, shorter fruit. And they both flower profusely in the spring. However, 80% of the flowers drop. Shortly after, I think, oh, great, these are growing. The ovary seems to be plumping up, but then 80% of the flowers drop. And, only 20% grow into mature fruit. In my readings, I have come across the idea that perhaps planting a male plant will help in the fruiting for more fruit to mature. Now, is that what you would suggest to me?
Oh my gosh, yeah, good for you. Because Isai, we talked about this about 25, 30 years ago, is the only real good self-fertile variety of the grape-sized kiwi, the small one. We used to have them in our arbors in the gardens. We loved them. They produced a lot each year. But no, when you do add a male, if that's becoming an issue, when you do add a male, there's the make sure it's a colomicta type of male, which is smaller, and a really good pollinator. So yeah, that will certainly help. But a couple of things in terms of when the blossoms are falling off. These are in the ground, right, Jasper? They're not sitting in a pot. They're in the ground.
No, they're in the ground.
Good. What are you feeding them now?
Really, not much, nothing.
Okay. Okay. I have to remind all of us that, that's why the canary died, because we didn't feed it. But seriously, some time to release fertilizer next year, even like a 14, 14, 14. When plants get leached out with so much, water and rain we get, they need a bit of nutrient back in there. And as we say this time of year, in that area, I would get something like a sea soil or really rich compost, work it into the soil. That'll improve the soil. Number two is in the spring when the leaves are out, some time to release fertilizer. That'll give new vigor to the plant. And watch out with overwatering. Sometimes overwatering when the flowers are on makes them drop prematurely. So just keep them moist. But I think this extra feeding, and I think it's a great idea to put a male in there. You'll find that that'll increase your percentage of pollination dramatically. And no, those are all the good things you're doing, but just a little bit of feeding and improve the soil would be great, Jasper. A good time to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And Diane in Squamish, you've got trouble with your tubers. What's going on?
Hello. I've been storing tubers, daily tubers, for many, many years. And last year I lost quite a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very cautious, and I keep the temperature from between 4 and 10 degrees, so I know there wasn't any freezing involved. So I'm trying things maybe a little bit differently, and really appreciate Brian's advice here in the sense that I usually store them in a mixture of peat and soil. This year I'm trying just peat, and I wonder what your opinion is on that, and any other tips of why I would have lost so many over last winter. They seem to basically kind of disintegrate, and in one of the varieties, I'd say shriveled, but it's just kind of weird. I ended up with way less tubers that I could plant this year.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that. Three things I always watch. I used to, but I don't anymore, wash tubers, get them all cleaned up, get the dirt off them. I don't do that anymore because I don't want them to get wet, because sometimes it's difficult for them to dry out properly. So that is number one, is no more, you get them out, get them dried up, have a fan on them, drying them out, then I put them away. But when you wash them, they stay wet too long, particularly if you're in an area where you don't get good air circulation. Number two, if it's possible to put a little summer fan, if you're worried about that, because it sounds like you already have washed them and tried to clean them up, put a little fan in there running to make sure they get that dryness. I love the fact that you changed from doing a soil mix and with peat moss to just peat moss, because peat moss has an ability to dry right out and also absorb extra moisture from those tubers and roots and so on. So I'm glad you switched over to that. So no, I think you know what you're doing. I think it was a bit too much moisture in the tubers at that time. It didn't get quite dried out, because you're doing everything, the way they should. You know what you're doing, but that's my concern.
All right. Thank you so much. Hope that helps. And a couple of emails have come in. Barb writes, when should you prune or ever-bearing raspberry plants? Not overbearing. Mine still have many green berries and are slowly ripening the fruit.
Yeah. Good question. And they are overbearing if you get them too much food. Anyway, but seriously, and people don't realize this, let them fruit as long as they can. We have raspberries just in our field right now in pots and containers. And gosh, the darn things are every day you get a few ripe fruits. We don't have severe cold for the next little while. So as long as they're producing the odd berry to go out and get them, absolutely. And then when they're completely finished bearing, or the leaves are starting to come off, as we normally would drop about mid-November or so, off with their heads, right to the ground. And it's very easy to do. And that's what the professional growers do. And we had a few CBC listeners who are really smart. Well, a lot of them are really smart. That said to me, Brian, I don't want to prune them at the ground. I want to save a few. And you can. If you save a few stems, that means they will produce earlier, and then cut the rest back, and they'll produce a little bit later. So it gives you a bit of diversity in terms of the harvesting time. But no, pretty quick, leave them as long as you can, then away we go, right to the ground.
All right. And Pat in Vancouver, some issue with weevils. Tell us more.
Well, hi, Brian.
Hi.
We have some small variegated bushes along our boulevard that have all these little chew marks in them. And I was told that they were weevils and that I could use nematodes, which I did in the spring, and no, they didn't work very well. So I'm just wondering, that there's hardly any leaves left on these poor little bushes. and they seem to be spreading further along the driveway.
Yeah, and they are a problem. And I'm not giving bad news about nematodes, but certainly in terms of grubs, they have not been effective. And talking to professionals who actually use many different substances to control grubs in people's lawns and gardens and so on, they're just reporting that they're not having a great success with nematodes. In weevils, however, they are probably the most effective thing we have right now. So I would keep applying it if you have them. The other thing, what a lot of folks, particularly in the island, were doing on rhododendrons, they used to be very bad, is put sticky tape on the stems. Now, if your plants are away from the building, where they climb up a building, you just put it around the stem. Sticky tape on all the stems going up. It seems to be a great inhibitor of them getting up there. So certainly try that. Do your nematodes. And just for the sake of it, because BTK is not very expensive, it's a bacteria spray, we're having great success with larvae of many different types of insects. Let's try a little bit BTK, see if that won't help a wee bit and controlling those weevils, because they can just spoil your entire garden. They can just spoil your plants very quickly. So, but again, if it's possible to get stems with sticky tape on them to slow them down getting up into your plants, and do try the nematodes again. Keep trying with that, and then try some BTK. I think those three things, Pat, we should be able to get some much better control for you.
All right. Thanks for calling in, Pat. And Brian, we've got about a minute left, but Sarah writes she just wants some advice on how to overwinter her potted calla lily because it was so beautiful in the summer.
Yeah, a very good point here. A potted calla lily, let it stop watering it right now. Let it completely die down. They like to be staying warm. I would say probably 15 degrees Celsius in the house over winter. Put it in a dark place. Let all the goodness in the leaves go right back into the pot. Just simply put the pot away in a dark, cool space. Closet would be good. And then probably about February, March, put it back in a window, begin watering it, and they'll come back to life. And that's the easiest way to overwinter your calla lilies, because these are mostly the colorful varieties, the yellows and the pinks and so on. The traditional Ethiopia white is the only one that's really hardy in this area, but the traditional ones, yeah, that's what we have to do.
Brian, we will have to leave it there. As always, just delightful and lovely to see you.
Oh, Amy, it's a great thing. And so I think both of us have a lot more respect for those darn old pumpkins.
We certainly do. Brian Minter, our CBC BC Today columnist, and that is our show for today.